I always thought marriage was built on trust. But 25 years later, I found a letter hidden in our garage that shattered everything. It wasn't addressed to me. It was from the woman my husband once loved, and maybe never stopped loving. I remember holding that letter in my hands, my heart pounding as I read his words. I'm marrying her, but my heart will always belong to you. In that moment, the man I had shared my life with felt like a stranger, and the vows I once cherished suddenly sounded like a lie whispered to the wrong person. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most had been living in someone else's shadow all along? This is not just my story. It's a story about love, betrayal, and the kind of truth that changes everything. A truth that came to light through small clues, awkward family gatherings, and one final revelation that left me speechless. If you've ever believed you knew someone completely, stay with me. And if you want to hear more real stories like this, stories that can make you think, feel, and maybe even heal, don't forget to subscribe. That way, if life pulls you away now, you'll still find your way back to the ending you won't see coming. Because in this story, the biggest twist is yet to be told. When I first met Mark, it wasn't anything like a fairy tale. It was a Tuesday afternoon at a dusty little hardware store. He was holding 2 different types of screws, looking completely lost. I teased him, asking if he planned to build a spaceship or a birdhouse. He laughed, that warm, deep laugh that made strangers turn their heads. From that day on, we found excuses to see each other. Coffee at the corner cafe, walks in the park where the leaves crunched under our shoes. He would tell me jokes that made no sense, and I would laugh anyway because it wasn't about the punchline. It was about him. When he proposed, it was nothing fancy. Just us in our tiny kitchen, surrounded by the smell of burnt toast because he forgot to turn off the toaster. He knelt down with the most nervous smile, holding a ring that wasn't expensive but fit my finger like it belonged there all along. I said yes before he could even finish his sentence. We built a life together in a small house with peeling paint and a porch swing that squeaked every time we sat on it. Our neighbors would joke that you could hear our laughter from 2 blocks away. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and at the time, that felt like more than enough. I remember rainy nights when the roof would leak, and we'd place a bucket under the drip, pretending it was a romantic fountain. Mark would grab my hands and dance with me in the living room, barefoot, while the storm rattled the windows. There was one night, we slow danced to a song neither of us knew the words to, and he whispered, "I'll never let you go." It felt so real that my heart believed it without question. Years passed. We had our share of struggles. Money was tight, bills piled up, and sometimes we argued about things that didn't really matter. But somehow we always found our way back to each other. He had this way of making me laugh in the middle of an argument just by raising one eyebrow in that ridiculous way, and I had a way of forgiving him faster than I probably should have. There was this one time he tried to fix the washing machine and ended up flooding the laundry room. I came home to find him standing in ankle-deep water, holding the mop like a sword, pretending to be a knight protecting his castle. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Looking back now, I wish I had stayed in that moment a little longer, because at the time, I had no idea that the man making me laugh in soggy socks was also keeping secrets that would one day break me. It started so small, so ordinary that I almost ignored it. A phone call he took in the garage late at night. Mark never liked talking on the phone for long, but that night, his voice was softer, almost careful when I asked who it was. He said it was just a guy from work, but something in the way he avoided my eyes made my stomach feel tight. Still, I let it go. Because when you love someone, you convince yourself there's a reasonable explanation for everything. Then, there were the weekends. Mark used to spend Saturday mornings making pancakes, singing terribly off-key while flipping them. One morning, I woke up to find the kitchen empty and him gone. No note, no smell of pancakes, just silence and an unwashed pan in the sink. From the night before when he finally came home, hours later, he had that same excuse work. I wanted to believe him, but I noticed a faint scent of perfume on his jacket. Not mine. Not anyone's I recognized. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a single earring in the pocket of his jeans. It was silver, shaped like a teardrop. I held it in my palm for a long time, wondering if it had fallen from a display at a store or from someone's ear. When I showed it to him, he laughed and said, "You know how clumsy I am? I probably sat somewhere and it got stuck." He kissed my forehead like he always did, and I forced a smile, but deep inside, something began to crack. Still, life went on. We attended a friend's barbecue one Sunday. Mark was charming, telling stories that had everyone laughing, even me, despite myself. But then, as he helped clear the table, I noticed him glancing at his phone every few minutes, his thumb tapping quickly as if hiding the screen. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the rhythm of his breathing, wondering, If he was dreaming about me or someone else, it wasn't all bad. There were still moments when he'd surprise me with flowers or fix the squeaky door without me asking. One rainy afternoon, we curled up on the couch watching old movies and eating popcorn until my jaw hurt from laughing at his silly impressions of the actors. Those moments made it harder to see the truth, because they made me hope the man I loved was still there, but hope is a fragile thing. One evening, while making dinner, I realized I was talking and he wasn't listening. He was staring out the window, his jaw tight, his eyes far away. When I asked what he was thinking, he said, "Nothing important," and I believed him. For the last time, looking back, the signs were all there. The late nights, the sudden work trips, the way he'd close his laptop when I walked into the room. But love makes you blind in the most dangerous way. And then came the moment when the first small crack in our life together split wide open. It was supposed to be one of those warm, noisy family Sundays. The kind where kids run through the backyard, uncles tell the same old stories, and the smell of roast chicken fills the whole house. Mark's sister Linda had invited us over. She was the kind of hostess who believed no plate should ever be empty and no glass half full. I even brought my famous apple pie, still warm from the oven at first. Everything felt normal. Mark was in the living room laughing with his brothers. I was in the kitchen with Linda, helping set the table, when I noticed she kept glancing at Mark. Not in a suspicious way, more like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. When we all sat down, the conversation flowed easily. Mark told a funny story about getting lost on a fishing trip, adding so many exaggerated details that even his dad, who never laughed much, cracked a smile. Then, just as I was about to take a bite of mashed potatoes, Linda said, "It," so softly, I almost missed it. "So, have you talked to her lately?" Mark froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He glanced at me, then back at Linda and said, "I told you, I'm not going there again." The table went quiet. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I looked from one face to another, trying to read the unspoken words in their eyes. "Who?" I asked, forcing a small laugh to break the tension. Linda's eyes widened. She hadn't meant for me to hear. "Oh, it's nothing," she said quickly, waving her hand, "just someone from a long time ago." But the way Mark's jaw tightened told me it was not nothing. Not at all. The rest of the meal felt like we were all acting in a play, pretending everything was fine. Mark poured me wine. I complimented the chicken. The kids played tag outside. But beneath it all, there was this strange, heavy silence that no one dared to touch. At one point, Linda dropped her napkin and bent down to pick it up when she came back up. She leaned close to me and whispered, "You should ask him." Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp, almost pitying. The drive home was unbearable. Mark kept the radio on, volume just loud enough to make conversation difficult. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights pass, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask. When we got home, I tried to lighten the mood. "Next time," I said with a smile, "let's just order pizza and watch football." Instead of family dinners, he gave a small laugh, but his eyes didn't join in. Later that night, as I was putting away the pie dish, I overheard him on the phone in the garage. That same soft voice I'd heard before. And then, the words, that made my blood run cold. "I can't keep this up. She's starting to notice." I stood in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly deafening. My hands trembled so badly I almost dropped the dish. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of dinner, Linda's glance, Mark's frozen fork, the whispered warning. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a crack anymore. It was a wound, and it was bleeding into every part of my life. 2 days after the family dinner, I decided to clean out the garage. It wasn't a heroic plan, just a quiet way to keep my mind from running in circles. Mark was at work. The house was silent, except for the sound of the vacuum in the living room. The garage was our little museum of forgotten things. Old camping gear, boxes of tax papers, a bicycle Mark swore he'd fix next summer 8 years ago. I started stacking boxes to make space. One box, tucked behind an old cooler, was heavier than I expected. Inside were random keepsakes, a baseball glove, a high school yearbook, some faded Polaroids. But at the very bottom, beneath a stack of yellowed envelopes, was one that didn't look old at all. The paper was crisp, the handwriting unfamiliar. I almost didn't open it. It felt wrong, like stepping over a line I couldn't uncross. But my hands had a will of their own. "Dear Mark," it began, "I can't believe you're going through with it, marrying her. But I guess I always knew this day would come." My stomach clenched. I read faster, the words slicing through me. "You told me once that your heart would always belong to me. I wonder if you'll still feel that way when you're sitting across from her at breakfast." Or when you look at her and pretend not to think of me. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, willing the tears not to fall. Not yet. The letter went on. She wrote about their memories, a trip to the coast, a cabin in the snow, a song they called theirs. Every line was a thread pulling me further from the man I thought I knew. And then came the part that stopped my breath. She'll never understand the way you love, she'll think it's enough. But we both know the truth. I read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. I put the letter back in the envelope, then immediately took it out. Again, some part of me wanted to destroy it, to burn it, to erase its existence. Another part of me wanted to slam it down on the kitchen table and demand answers instead. I sat on the garage floor, holding it like it might break. And for a moment, I almost laughed. Because, wasn't this just like my life? I'd been saving old paint cans for future projects that never came. And apparently, my husband had been saving old flames. The laugh caught in my throat, turning into a sob. It came from somewhere deep, somewhere I didn't know existed. And once it started, I couldn't stop. When Mark came home that evening, I was in the kitchen making tea. The letter was in my sweater pocket, heavy as a stone. He kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and said, "Productive." We had dinner. We watched TV. He went to bed early. I stayed up, sitting at the dining table, turning the envelope over and over in my hands. At midnight, I slid it back into the box in the garage. Not because I forgave him. Not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I wanted to see how far this would go, and whether he would ever tell me himself. It's strange how a single letter can change the way you remember your entire life. After finding it, my mind kept rewinding to moments I thought I understood, only to see them in a different light. One memory kept playing over and over. Our wedding day. It had been a warm June afternoon, the kind of day that feels like the world is blessing you. I wore my mother's pearl earrings. Mark stood at the altar in a suit that made his shoulders look broader, his smile so wide it felt like it could hold me forever. I used to think that smile was for me. Now I wondered who else it might have been for. I remember his vows. He didn't use the traditional script. He said he wanted his own words, something from the heart. At the time, I thought it was romantic, but sitting alone at the kitchen table, the letter in my pocket, I realized something. Some of the phrases in that letter, I had heard them before. On our wedding day, from his lips. To me, I will always carry you in my heart, no matter where life takes us. Those exact words had been in that letter, but written to her. I could see it clearly now. Mark, looking into my eyes, saying vows that weren't even meant for me. The guests had called it beautiful. I had called it fate, but now it felt like plagiarism of the worst kind. The thought almost made me laugh. Almost because really, what kind of man recycles his wedding vows for a different bride? That night, I opened our old wedding album. I stared at the pictures, his hand on mine, the way he tilted his head when I spoke. I used to see love in those gestures. Now I wondered if I was watching an actor in a role he never wanted. The next morning, over breakfast, I decided to test something. Mark was eating toast, flipping through the newspaper. Casually, I said, "Do you remember your vows?" He smiled, still reading. "Bits and pieces." "Why?" "Oh, I was just thinking about how special they were. How original." I watched his face closely, no flicker of guilt, no stumble in his chewing. "Yeah," he said. "I wanted them to be one of a kind." The irony nearly choked me. For the rest of the day, I kept hearing those vows in my head, like a song you can't turn off, except every lyric is a lie. I started imagining what her wedding had been like if she had one at all. Did she stand there, hearing those words in private, thinking they were hers alone? Or had he always planned to hand them to me someday, like a hand-me-down dress that didn't quite fit? The more I thought about it, the more absurd it became. Here I was, 25 years into a marriage, built partly on vows that weren't mine. And somehow, I had never noticed, but I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I wanted to understand the whole story before I brought it into the light. Because if those vows weren't meant for me, then maybe other parts of our life weren't. Either, and that I feared might be the twist I wasn't ready for. Our 25th anniversary was supposed to be a celebration. I'd planned a quiet dinner at home, candles, his favorite roast chicken, and the apple pie he always swore tasted like his grandmother's. I wanted it to feel intimate, just the two of us. Like when we first fell in love, I spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon filled the air, and I caught myself humming the same tune I used to hum when we were newlyweds. For a brief moment, I forgot about the letter, the recycled vows, the gnawing questions. I just wanted to remember what it felt like to love him without doubt. He came home later than usual, holding a small, neatly wrapped box. "Happy anniversary," he said, kissing my cheek like he always did. Polite, practiced, almost choreographed. We sat down to eat. The flicker of candlelight softened his features, and for a moment, I almost believed in us again. Almost after dessert, he slid the box across the table. "Open it," he said. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with a date, but it wasn't our wedding date. I stared at the numbers, my fork frozen midair. "This isn't right," I said softly. He frowned, then chuckled awkwardly. "Oh, must have been a mix-up at the store." But his eyes darted away, just long enough for me to know. The date was familiar. Too familiar. It was the same date from the letter the day he had first met her. My chest tightened. The bracelet felt heavier than silver should. I set it back in the box, sliding it across the table without a word. The silence stretched between us. He tried to fill it. "I thought you'd like it. It's meaningful." Meaningful. The word echoed in my head like an insult. I wanted to laugh bitterly. Of all the gifts he could give me on our anniversary, he chose a tribute to another woman. Was this stupidity or cruelty? Or was it just the kind of carelessness you develop when you've spent too long lying? I stood up, cleared the plates, and busied myself at the sink. "Over the running water," I said. "Do you remember our honeymoon?" He smiled faintly. "Of course. You got sunburned on the second day." I forced a laugh. "Yeah. I also remember you disappearing for an hour that morning to make a phone call. Was that meaningful too?" His face froze. For the first time in a long time, I saw panic in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was enough. We didn't speak much after that. He went to bed early, leaving me alone with the soft crackle of dying candle flames. I sat at the table, bracelet in hand, wondering how many other anniversaries had been marked by dates and memories that didn't belong to me that night. Lying in the dark beside him, I realized something chilling. This marriage wasn't breaking. Apart, it had been broken for years. I'd just never seen the pieces until now. And the most terrifying part, I wasn't sure I wanted to put them back together. The bracelet sat on the counter all night, its silver catching the faint glow from the street lamp outside. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't keep swallowing questions and calling it patience. He came into the kitchen, hair still, damp from the shower, reaching for his coffee mug like it was any other day. I stopped him with one sentence. "We need to talk about her." He froze, hand hovering over the coffee pot. For a long moment, the only sound was the slow drip of the machine. "I don't know what you mean," he said finally, voice low, almost rehearsed. I slid the letter across the table, the paper now creased from all the times I'd unfolded it, hoping it would read differently. "And this. Do you not know what this means? Either." His eyes flicked to the letter, then back to me. "Where did you find that?" "In the garage, next to the box of our wedding keepsakes." "Fitting, isn't it?" He sat down, rubbing his temples. "I should have thrown it away years ago." "That's what you're sorry for? Not that you wrote it, but that you forgot to hide it better." He didn't answer. I felt the heat rising in my chest. All those years I thought we were building a life together, and all along I was just a placeholder. "Was our wedding a lie?" I asked, my voice shaking. His shoulders dropped. "I loved you." Loved. Past tense, I still don't. I cut in. "You don't get to use that word after engraving another woman's date into my anniversary gift." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "I mean, who does that? Was there a 2-for-1 deal at the jewelry store?" He winced, but I didn't care. Every ounce of humiliation I'd swallowed over the years was spilling out now. Finally, he said it. "I never stopped thinking about her. We lost touch, but she was my first love. You were, I was, what, convenient? Available? A safe choice." His silence was louder than any answer. I thought about the dinners, the anniversaries, the quiet Sunday mornings. How many of those moments were shared with me in body? But with her in his mind, "You could have told me," I whispered. "You could have spared me 25 years of playing the lead in a story where I was never the main character." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was afraid of losing myself if I stayed. "I think you should leave for a while," I said. His eyes widened. "What? Where am I supposed to go?" "Maybe you can check if she's still available," I said, my voice colder than I thought. It could be. I half expected him to argue, to fight for us, but he just sat there, staring at the letter like it held the answer to a question I no longer cared to ask. As he packed a bag that afternoon, I went into the backyard. The air was crisp, the kind that made your lungs feel clean. For the first time in years, I breathed without feeling like I was choking on unspoken words. When the door finally closed behind him, the house was unbearably quiet. But it wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of space. The kind you need before deciding whether to rebuild or start over entirely. 2 weeks passed since he left. I thought the worst was over, that the wound was deep, but at least it had stopped bleeding. I was wrong. It started with a phone call. A polite young woman from a storage facility across town said, "Ma'am, your husband's rental unit is overdue. Could you settle the bill or clear it out?" I almost told her she had the wrong number, but then she read out the name and birth date. It was his. Curiosity clawed at me. I drove there the same afternoon, telling myself it was just boxes of old tools or clothes. The manager rolled open the metal door, and a dusty smell rushed out. Inside were neat stacks of boxes labeled with dates, and a large trunk in the back. I opened the first box. Photographs, hundreds of them. Not of us. Of her snapshots of beach vacations I never knew he took. Candid shots of her laughing, reading, even cooking. Some were decades old. Others looked alarmingly recent. My stomach twisted. Had he been seeing her all along, even while we were raising our kids? Then I opened the trunk. Inside was a wedding dress, not mine. Her name was stitched on a small fabric tag inside the bodice, and under that dress I found a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. The top one read, "To my forever bride." I sank to the floor, the cold concrete biting through my jeans. The timeline in my head snapped into place. The late nights, the mysterious business trips, the birthdays he forgot. He hadn't just kept her in his heart. He had kept a whole life with her in secret. I must have been sitting there for an hour before the manager poked his head in. "You okay, ma'am?" I forced a laugh, the kind that comes out like a cough. "Oh, I'm great. Just finding out my husband's been moonlighting as someone else's groom." That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch. The moon hung low, fat and yellow, like it was listening. I thought about calling him, screaming, demanding answers. But what was left to say? The truth was already louder than anything he could admit. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Him, her, standing in front of a chapel in Vegas, smiling like teenagers. The date on the back, our 20th wedding anniversary. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then, for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief. Relief, because now I knew there was nothing to fix. No marriage to salvage. No maybe, too. Wonder about at 3 a.m., I put the photo in the fireplace and watched it curl into black. When the last ember faded, I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you for finally setting me free." The next morning, I booked a trip, not to run away, but to start over. Somewhere sunny. Somewhere my laughter wouldn't echo in the shadows of someone else's love story. And as I locked the door behind me, I realized the real betrayal wasn't that he loved her. It was that I had forgotten to love myself. Looking back at this story, it's easy to focus on the betrayal, on the lies, on the years lost. But as someone who has listened to hundreds of stories like this, I can tell you, betrayal doesn't just break you. It can also wake you. Sometimes, the ending you feared the most is the beginning you needed all along. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it changes the way you see love, trust, even yourself. But it also forces you to ask a powerful question. Who am I when I'm not defined by someone else's promises? For some, that answer leads to healing. For others, it leads to new adventures, new friendships, even new love. And that's what I want you to remember. The story isn't over until you decide it is. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever uncovered a truth that completely changed your life? What did it teach you about yourself and about the people you trust? Share it in the comments. Your words might help someone else find the strength they're looking for right now. And if you want to hear more real-life stories, stories that will make you feel, reflect, and sometimes even laugh through the tears, make sure you subscribe to this channel. That way you won't miss the next twist or the next moment of hope hiding just beyond it. Because in life, as in every story we tell here, the ending is never quite what you expect.